A new starting quarterback is in Atlanta, and a lot more to talk about with Falcons football. Here on Chase Sports News, we are previewing each of the 32 NFL team seasons before things get started. And today we preview the Atlanta Falcons season with a very special guest, their team reporter for ESPN, Marc Raimondi. Marc, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
What's up, Chase? How's everything?
It's great. I appreciate you joining me here today. Obviously, a lot to talk about when it comes to Falcons football. Looking to get back to that postseason, which you haven't gotten to in a while. So, obviously, a lot to talk about. We're excited to have you on today. Overall, just obviously, you're ESPN. You're in the facility. Just what stood out to you as a whole from Falcons minicamp?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't do a whole lot during minicamp as far as what they were showing us as the press. They were the only snaps that I saw at minicamp both days that I was there was snaps taken by Emory Jones, who's probably going to be like the fourth string quarterback for the Falcons. So they were not giving anything away at all. It was really just the reserves. But the one thing that I'll say is that they are very excited about their first round picks, Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr., and they so badly need a pass rush this year. I mean, it is so critical to the team. They just haven't had a good pass rush in a very, very long time. They've had the worst pass rush in the NFL for almost a decade now. So they really need those guys to play well as rookies, and I think they'll be playing quite a bit. And kind of an unsung hero early so far that the coaching staff has been raving about is Divine Diablo, who is a linebacker free agent signing from the Raiders in the offseason, and they think that he's going to fit in really well in that middle, inside linebacker spot alongside Caden Ellis.
Yes, I think a lot of times, I talk with some reporters, and sometimes minicamp, you can't really get a lot. You have to wait till that training camp opportunity to really see what this team is going to do, what direction they are going to go. And what we do know, though, is there's been a lot of reports. Kirk Cousins may have not gone to Atlanta had he not known the news, and it does look like, or not look like, we do know that Michael Penix Jr. Will be the starting quarterback next season, barring an injury. I mean, last season, this was a team in Atlanta that you signed Kirk Cousins to that big deal, $40 million annually. You're one of the favorites to win the NFC South.
Mhm.
Then all of a sudden, Cousins falls apart midseason. You once again finish under 500. And I feel like obviously that collapse from Cousins and kind of that like 2/3 mark of the season was what derailed the success of this team. What even happened to Kirk Cousins, who was seemingly playing great football to begin the year?
He got hit in week 10 against the Saints, and he injured his elbow and his shoulder, and they were very coy about the injury for the entire season. And he was on the injury report one time in week 11, the first day of week 11, the Wednesday of week 11, and he explained it away. I actually asked him about it after the Denver Broncos game, where the Falcons got crushed in that game at Denver, and Cousins played not well at all for the second straight game. And I asked him about the injury report, and he said he was 100% healthy. Turns out he was not being 100% honest when he said that. He spoke about this back in February on the NFL Network. He admitted that he got hit in that game, hurt his shoulder and his elbow, and he was not the same since after that. He was affected for the entire rest of the season. And the Falcons, as you mentioned, Chase, they went on a 4-game losing streak, pretty much coinciding with that hit in the Saints game. They lost 4 in a row, and that knocked them basically not out of playoff contention. They still had a chance to win at the end, but they were 6-3. They were riding high. Things were looking good. They were 4-0 in the division, and then all of a sudden, Cousins, I guess, gets hurt, and they're just not the same without him at full strength. And they end up going 8-9, missing the playoffs. Haven't had a winning season now since 2017, and a real source of frustration for Falcons fans because if Cousins was truly hurt, as it seemed like he was, could the team have put in Michael Penix Jr. in his place? Could they have benched him? Because I mean, Chase, he had 8 interceptions in 4 games, no touchdown passes. I mean, that's a red flag if there ever was one.
I think the interesting part though is okay, you're saying that he had this injury issue and obviously would probably recover by this time. If this is true, why isn't a team going after him at this point? Like, is there a team that would say, look, before this injury, we saw what Kirk Cousins was doing. It was at a borderline elite level. It was at a level that was great in Minnesota,
Mhm.
and one that got him over 150 million in Atlanta. So why do you not think a team is really pursuing him so greatly if his disappointments last season came from the injury?
A few reasons. One being that the price tag, right? He is owed $27.5 million in guaranteed money in 2025, and the Falcons are not willing to trade Kirk Cousins unless a team takes on at least a chunk of that salary. And that has been a hang up, right? Not every team wants to do that. Not every team wants to take a risk on, a 37-year-old quarterback who comes with
Sure.
that kind of a price tag, right? And then the other issue is that Cousins has a no trade clause. So if a team would be interested, he would have to clear the deal. And he's just not going to take any kind of a deal unless he's the starting quarterback. And right now, since the draft, there really aren't any teams out there. Since Aaron Rodgers signed with Pittsburgh, there are really no teams out there that don't have a starting quarterback. Everyone is
Right.
pretty much settled, right, at this point. Now, things could change, of course, right? Injuries happen. It's the NFL. These are inevitable. So I think that once training camp starts, the season starts, there could be potential landing spots for Kirk Cousins, and I'm sure the Falcons would, be on the phone listening to those offers if they come about.
So obviously, when Cousins was benched, Michael Penix Jr. started the final few games. He'll once again be the starter in Atlanta, as we mentioned earlier. So you're mentioning how maybe some of these teams won't want to go after, Cousins given the contract, also how things could change. How do you see this whole situation playing out? Because to me, as it looks like right now, it looks like that Cousins is just going to be sticking around and possibly just being there for the ride in case Penix disappoints.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where in a perfect scenario, if you're Michael Penix Jr. and the Falcons, you don't want him looking over his shoulder at Kirk Cousins, right? But if he starts to struggle, that could become a distraction. That could be something that the media starts talking about. Fans start calling maybe for Cousins to start games. If Penix struggles out of the gate, he is still kind of a rookie, right? He started 3 games last year,
Right.
but he's like a rookie 0.5, like a rookie and a half, so to speak. So it is a weird situation, certainly. From the Falcons' perspective, they see it as, well, hey, if something happens to Michael Penix Jr., if he gets injured, which by the way he did several times in college, right? He had 4 season-ending injuries in
Sure.
college. They have a really, really good insurance policy in Kirk Cousins, right? He's a plus level NFL quarterback on their bench right now. So they're seeing it as that. And then again, if someone goes down during the season, they'll certainly listen to offers for Cousins. But I don't think they mind having him as the backup because he's still a guy that people respect in the locker room. He's a veteran voice in the locker room. He's not going to really cause any kind of him personally. He's not going to cause any kind of distraction from Penix,
Sure.
on the field. And again, if Penix gets hurt, you slide Kirk in there, and you're still probably a playoff team if he's right.
But how much is this team limited in what they could do to surround Penix and make this roster great if you still have that $40 million a year hanging on your salary cap?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chase. So they were pretty hamstrung in free agency, honestly. They were not able to make the kind of moves that, a team that was 8 and 9 and is trying to make the playoffs for the first time in 8 seasons would make, right? They were able to get Leonard Floyd, who is a solid veteran pass rusher from the 49ers. He's been around a long time. He played for Raheem Morris when he was the defensive coordinator of the Rams in LA. They got Morgan Fox, who was a Chargers defensive lineman. They got Divine Diablo, who I mentioned, a linebacker. All guys that are, kind of like mid-level to almost discount guys that they like. Jordan Fuller is another guy, the safety. And they re-signed some of their guys as well. But they didn't make any big splashes in free agency. The big splash they made was in the draft, where they drafted Jalen Walker, and then they traded up to get James Pierce Jr. And that they feel like was a pretty big coup.
So you talked about how maybe you're limited in some of your additions. I do think the Falcons did have a great offseason, given the fact that again Jalen Walker and James Pierce both seem to be like the type of guys that could turn out to be some great defensive contributors right out of the gate for Atlanta. Obviously, you're talking about Leonard Floyd as well, a really productive pass rusher. Given again the situation Atlanta had, I think they did a decent job. However, when you're looking at this team, you mentioned the rookie and a half type quarterback in Penix.
Yep.
Is this team positioned better for success than you believe they were this time last year?
It's so hard to say because so much is hinging on Michael Penix Jr. And last year there was a lot of confidence in Atlanta because they had Kirk Cousins. And aside from the Achilles injury, you didn't really know how he was going to come back. But if you project Kirk Cousins, you kind of know what you're getting. You're getting again a plus NFL quarterback, a guy that has won a lot of games in the NFL and puts up numbers, production. So
Sure.
there was a lot of excitement in Atlanta last year. So much so, Chase, that they sold out their season ticket packages before training camp for the first time in 2 decades. So
Yeah.
there was a lot of buzz in Atlanta last year. So it's hard to say. There's a lot more unknown going into this season. I mean, it's the NFL, so it's all unknown, right? It's so hard to
Sure.
predict any of this stuff.
Right.
But Penix is a guy that they are so high on. They really, really believe he is the guy. He is the franchise quarterback for the future. That they think that he has a special arm. It's pretty apparent that he definitely has that incredible arm talent. How he pieces everything else together is still in question. How he gels with his weapons and so forth. But this is still a team that has Bijan Robinson and Drake London and a good offensive line, and they should be a very good offensive team in 2025. I mean, I think that if Penix is even average or better, they should be a very good offensive team. And I think that's why the NFL has them on prime time 5 times in 2025.
Right.
I think the NFL sees them. Look, maybe they're not going to be a world beater, but they're going to put on some entertaining performances with that offense.
I think so, 100%. And what I find really the most interesting about this offense is the running back room. I believe one of the best in the NFL. When you look at Bijan Robinson as the lead tailback, Tyler Algier kind of backing him up. Robinson really took that leading tailback spot even after Algier's 1,000-yard rookie
Mm-hmm.
2022 season. Where does Algier, do you believe, where does he fit in right now with this offense, given the fact that Bijan's going to want to get his touches and you're going to want to see what Penix can do through the air?
Yeah, he didn't get as many touches last year, right? All year compared to the year before. And Bijan
Sure.
Robinson has rounded into, for my money, I would say a top three running back in the NFL. You can even make the argument. I would put him right behind Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry in the NFL. Jahmyr Gibbs is right up there too. But, Bijan Robinson is an elite talent going into year three. Only going to get better probably in, his second year in Zach Robinson's offense. And, Tyler Algier is maybe the best backup running back in the league. I mean,
Yeah.
he had a 1,000-yard season, as a rookie, and just a guy that I think where he really excels is in the second halves of games. And the defense is tired, and that is the last guy you want to see coming down the pipe at you, Tyler Algier, because he's like a bowling ball. He played linebacker, when he was in college and high school, and he's just an overwhelming guy when the defense is gassed in the third and fourth quarter, or they're on the field for a long time, and all of a sudden you got a fresh Tyler Algier shoving the ball down your throat. You
Right.
don't want that. You don't want to be, behind in games against the Falcons in the second half, because you're gonna Bijan Robinson. We know he's spectacular, but Algier is a dog. He's gonna have those angry runs, and I think that's gonna be his role on the team. He can be a hot hand sometimes. Where he's running real well, and those second halves again. You don't want to tackle that guy. It's not fun. It's not a good time.
I think right now my biggest concern for the offense does land in the passing game. Obviously, the unknowns with Penix, we have to see what he can do, and if his college talents can translate to the NFL level. Of course, the big question when you look at young quarterbacks. But I just don't know. You mentioned the good offensive line, the great running game. That's going to help him out for sure. But do you believe? Obviously, Drake London, a really solid receiver. Wide receiver one, Kyle Pitts. You know what you're going to get out of him. I believe one of the NFL's best tight ends. But do you believe the amount of pass catchers that he has, given their pass catching depth? Do you believe he's being put in a position to excel right away?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think Darnell Mooney really surprised last year. He had a really, really good season with Cousins throwing to him. And even when, if you look at the numbers, considering Cousins struggled for 5 games, put up some pretty good numbers when he just missed a
Sure.
thousand yards, right? And then Ray McLeod, again, a guy that I think what Terry Fontenot, the Falcons GM, is very good at. And I know that his drafts have been criticized over the years, and rightfully so in most cases, but he is really good about finding those guys in the free agent wire that are good fits for the team, and they almost always turn out well for the Falcons. And I would put Mooney and McLeod in that grouping as well. So I think that while maybe they're not the biggest names, and maybe they're not gonna have the most spectacular plays, they're very solid players. And as far as as depth goes, I was talking to Ike Hilliard, and of course, a very good wide receiver in his own right. He's the wide receivers coach in Atlanta, and he feels like they actually have more depth this year going to 2025, the training camp, than they did last year. And there's a few guys that have stood out, like a Nick Nash, who's a undrafted free agent who they really like a lot in Atlanta, and he put up big numbers at San Jose State last year in college, and they think that he could be a player. I don't know if he makes the team. It's going to be hard. They still have Casey Washington, who was a 6th-round pick last year, and he developed a good chemistry with Mike Penix Jr. On the second team, on the scout team last year. So I think he's the guy they hope to break out as maybe the 4th or 5th guy. And they have Kadar Hodge, who he had a walk-off touchdown catch last year against the Bucks, and he's like their special teams. He was a Pro Bowler for special teams, but he's a good wide receiver too. So they have pieces, but they're not the most exciting. They may not be the biggest names, but they can make plays, and they're veterans, and if Penix can get them the ball, they'll catch it.
Real quick before we go to kind of the schedule breakdown, let's touch on this defense a little bit. We mentioned some of the additions, Leonard Floyd, and then obviously the two first-round draft picks that Atlanta should benefit with having obviously Jalen Walker and James Pierce. But this is a defense as a whole where things just haven't gone well. They've ranked in the bottom half of teams in points allowed in each of the past 3 years in terms of defensive yardage, also in the bottom 10 of the NFL in 2 of the past 3 years. Given those additions, is this defense ready to take that leap and have a successful season in 2025?
That is the big question mark. I mean, Penix is a question mark, but the defense is really something that we just don't know. And there's a new defensive coordinator, Jeff Ulbrich, and he's very well respected, and he's had very, very good defenses over the years, with the Jets and so on and so forth under Robert Saleh. So there's a hope that if the defense can at least be average, right? They think the offense is going to put up numbers. So if the defense can at least be average, they can be a playoff, contender at least. Now, I do think the defense has gotten better on paper. One thing it's definitely gotten, and that was really important, Chase, was it's gotten younger and speedier. That was a real big priority last year because that defense was not fast. And it was exposed many times in the run game, in the pass game. This is a team that gave up the worst completion percentage to an opposing quarterback in the entire NFL. I mean, quarterbacks just threw the ball and made completions whenever they wanted against the Falcons last year. And that was a statement on both the pass rush and the secondary. And I think the secondary has gotten at least a little bit better. They really, really like 2 other draft picks, Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, who is going to play safety for them. Maybe he starts. They have Jordan Fuller too, I think, but there's more depth there this year than there was last year. And they got Billy Bowman out of Oklahoma, who is going to play nickel corner. He's probably going to compete for that job with Clark Phillips or a D. Alford, who was a starting nickel last year. Didn't have a great year last year, D. Alford. So they feel like they've gotten better. They've gotten younger. They've gotten faster. Divine Diablo is very fast, also in the middle of that field. If Troy Anderson can come back, he's another inside linebacker. He's a guy that has a lot of athleticism and a lot of speed on the inside. Caden Ellis is, I think, one of the more underrated linebackers in the entire NFL. So he'll be a stalwart again. The one thing that I will say that is a bit worrisome is the interior of the defensive line, because they lost Grady Jarrett. They cut Grady Jarrett, and he was for 10 years one of the best defensive tackles in the entire league and a real leader for the Falcons. And they didn't really replace him with anyone major. They got Morgan Fox, and they have some guys from the team last year. Zach Harrison's a guy that they really need to step up, in year 3 for him. He's still 23, 24 years old. So they think that there's more, to him there. Ruka Rororo, who was their 2nd-round pick last year, is a guy like in the interior that they really, really need to step up. There's young guys there that they need to have big seasons for them to have, to maximize their potential as a team on defense.
I think potential is the great word. I think the sky is the limit, but I think a lot of pieces do have to really come together for this defense to be at a really solid level to complement the offense. I mean, look, this is a team that is looking to get back to the postseason and have just a winning record for the first time since 2017. So I think that this season they are in a decent position to do that. Let's take a look at the schedule as we do with all teams here on these Chase Sports News season previews. This is just tentatively what I would have given their schedule is kind of way too early. Record prediction at 9-8, and you mentioned it. Yes, it's considered the 13th easiest schedule in the NFL just based off of opponent winning percentage from 2024. But I believe this is a brutal schedule. It's sometimes the early week 5 bye, the 6 standalone games, 5 primetime, as we mentioned, and then the week 10 game against the Colts in Germany. Overall, what stands out to you from the schedule and kind of looking at my win-loss projection as well?
I've been saying it since the schedule came out. Weeks 9 through 13 to me are the most important part of the season for the Falcons. I really believe they need to go at least 4-1 during that stretch. You have them going 3-2. I think they need to go 4-1 in order to have the best possible chance to make the playoffs. Because, like you said, there are a lot of good teams on this schedule that are not. I mean, some of them are road games, a lot of primetime games. It's a tough schedule. But week 9, Patriots. Then you got Colts. Panthers, which they have a tough Panthers. These division opponents are never going to be easy, but the Panthers should not be they're not going to be a great team this year, most likely. Same thing with the Saints. They're probably not going to be a great team this year. And then the Jets. So you have 5 games that are all very winnable if you are where you think you are. If you're a Falcons fan or if you're in the front office or on the coaching staff, you should be able to beat all of those 5 teams. But I think they need to go at least 4-1. If they don't go at least 4-1, I think it's going to be kind of similar to last year. Like you have them 9-8, right? I think it'll be similar to that. But if they go 4-1, then we could be talking about 10-win season, playoffs, and so forth. 9-8, Chase is not a bad record. It would be their best record in 8 seasons, right? But this is also a team that there's expectations for to an extent, and I do think that Coach Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot are. This could be a make or break year as far as their jobs, and I think I'm not sure if 9-8 is going to be enough to get them there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently just kind of doing this as it's just kind of started. Some of the teams that I've filmed here earlier preview their seasons. I feel like I have a lot of them in kind of that like 7 to 10 win range. I think kind of fighting for those
Hmm.
wild card spots, or in the Falcons case, trying to maybe compete for a weaker NFC South. I think
Right.
there's just going to be a lot of teams that are in this 8 to 10 win range. You're just all going to be scrapping and clawing for those spots, and I think it's going to make it a really entertaining end of the season. I think just in terms of why I have them 3-2, I think that I don't know if this team is dominant enough or consistent enough, as we know of right now,
Yeah.
to go 4-2 in the division. I think they split with all of those teams because I think they can get a great performance against Tampa Bay. I also think they can lay duds against Carolina and New Orleans, just given the foundation of this team. And that's why I do have them going 3-3 in the division, which I always say is okay, but you got to make up wins elsewhere. And when you don't include the divisional games, this team's home schedule, I feel like, is so challenging this year. At
Yeah.
home against Commanders, they made the NFC Championship game last year. Home against the
Mhm.
Bills, they made the AFC Championship game last year. The Dolphins are usually a very competitive team with Tua Tagovailoa under center at
Mhm.
quarterback. The Seahawks, a 10-win team last year. Now they have Sam Darnold, who really had that breakout campaign. The Rams were in the divisional round last year, and I think improved this offseason. Like,
Yeah.
that is a brutal stretch at home. Those games are supposed to be easier. They're making it very challenging, the NFL schedule makers, for this Atlanta team, and I think they're going to have to capitalize on some of those home games to possibly advance to the postseason. But that is a brutal schedule, in my opinion.
Yeah, that Rams game that you have them losing in week 17. That is going to be a pivotal game, and it's going to be drama because it's Raheem Morris against his old
Right.
mates, right, and Sean McVay, and there are so many folks on the Falcons right now, the coaching staff that were part of that McVay tree, and they were with the Rams. So that's going to be a really big game, probably for both teams in week 17. That's going to be kind of a make or break, and even like you said, like the last 5 games of the season for the Falcons are all against NFC opponents, and they're all gonna be I think the Cardinals will be jockeying for maybe a wild card too at that point. So it's gonna be really really interesting, which is why again I think that weeks 9 through 13 they got to take care of business against those teams because if
Right.
they don't, it's gonna be a rough go.
My grandfather always had a saying, and he said this in baseball, but he always said, "Split with the good teams and beat the worst teams." And I think if
Yeah.
Atlanta kind of comes into the season with that philosophy, you're looking at a postseason appearance. And I do think the schedule, they do have some easy patches, but they got to make sure, as you said, they capitalize on those opportunities before they have to play some of the other juggernauts, especially even on their home turf. And that's going to be very challenging, obviously, given that Week 5 bye as well. Look, let's come back here. You mentioned how 9-8 would not be a terrible record. It would be their best record
Hmm.
in 8 years, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
but also how it still would feel somewhat disappointing for this Atlanta team. What do you believe is considered acceptable? And if they don't reach that, apparent mark, what changes are there going to be? Any considerable changes made to this core?
I think playoffs are bust. I think it has to be a playoff season. I think that's really like a must. If everyone is going to be back next year, I think they have to make the playoffs. Now, as far as the roster itself, if it isn't the same, folks running the show next year, who knows, right? They may blow the whole thing up. But I think that you still have a pretty young core on offense, right? You still have Penix, Bijan Robinson, Drake London. I think a lot of teams would love to have those guys who are all 25 and under, right? Who are still on their rookie contracts. Now, London will have to get paid pretty soon, and then Robinson will be after that. But I think that the offense is going to be built around those three guys moving forward. And I don't know what's going to happen with Kyle Pitts. He's a free agent after this season. I think if he has a big year, who knows? But I'm not sure if he's back in Atlanta in 2026. But so I see it as being those three guys, and then the defense. Again, it's like the defense is not aside from like an AJ Terrell and a Jesse Bates. I would say the defense is kind of up in the air to see what spots get filled in the future.
If they don't make the playoffs, is Raheem Morris time in Atlanta? Is it done?
It's so hard to say. I mean, I hate the impatience. Like 2 seasons is not a very long time to build something. Look at me, it took took Dan Campbell, a few seasons to build things in Detroit, and that's working out pretty well. They had the patience with him, and I don't know. I don't know what Arthur Blank is thinking. I would hazard to guess that Raheem Morris is probably safe no matter what happens this year, unless it's a complete mess, right? If they go 9-8, I don't know if they fire Raheem Morris. I think he's probably with the team moving forward. But Terry Fontenot, I think he had a really good offseason, and I think that really helped him. But he's going into year 5 now, and they have not made the playoffs. He's been there since 2021. So actually, he's been there for 5 seasons. So it's a big one for him. There's no doubt. There's no doubt.
Marc Raimondi, this has been incredible. One last question here before we wrap up. If you had to give a prediction and an expectation for what Atlanta will achieve in 2025,
Yeah.
what would that be, whether that's in terms of a record or just overall success that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pretty close, like a 9-8. I can see 10-7. If Penix becomes, which again, quarterbacks at his stage don't usually do as well. But then again, we saw Jaden Daniels last year, take the Commanders pretty far. So, if Penix has a big season, division title, maybe win a playoff game, something like that. But it's just hard to say. And if you're a Falcons fan, it's like you can't believe it until you see it, right? Because it's been so long since there's been any kind of winning in this city. So I think they have to just get the door open and have a winning season first, and then see where the chips fall from there.
Yeah, I'm very curious how this team will do. And I'm personally a huge fan of Michael Penix, the way he plays the game. So I'm excited to watch Falcons games this year. I think there's a lot of hype, as there should be, but also a lot of unknowns we're going to have to keep an eye on. Marc Raimondi, thank you so much for coming on the show today to preview the Atlanta Falcons season. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to wrap this one up here. Atlanta Falcons fans, let us know in the comments what you do think this team will do this season. For our general NFL fans, don't go anywhere. We're previewing the Falcons season. It's one of the first we previewed all year. Many more teams to go here as we preview every single NFL team season before things do get started. So don't go anywhere. Here from Chase's Sports News, I'm your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long.